As a New Zealander who has done at least 4 road trips around the country, has lived in different places, and travelled virtually every corner of my homeland pretty extensively, I want to share with you everything I know about this beautiful country to help you plan out your trip and have the best possible time while you're here. There is going to be so much information in this video, so I would definitely recommend taking some notes, although everything will be timestamped below, so if you need to review something, you can come back to it later. However, I would recommend watching it the whole way through, as I'm going to be sharing some general information and things you need to know, plus a 2-week itinerary and my recommendations for a shorter or longer trip depending on how much time you have. Then I'm also going to be breaking down activities and things to do from north to south, share some of my favourite places with you, and then some extra tips, tricks and things you should know before you come here. So without further ado, I'm going to start talking about one of my favourite topics, New Zealand. First things first, let's talk about the landscape. So New Zealand is made up of 2 main islands, obviously named North and South. Pretty straightforward. However, we're actually comprised of about 600 different islands. Some of these are near the mainland, namely Stewart Island, which is sometimes considered the 3rd island of the country. There are a few islands near the mainland that are reasonably accessible and pretty cool to visit, but I will talk about them in more depth later. We look like a pretty small country, but we are actually quite sizable. If you've ever seen an overlay of New Zealand and Europe, you'd know that we're actually about 2,000 kilometres long from top to bottom. This takes around 4 months to walk. Yes, there is a track called the Te Araroa, and people do it quite frequently. But you're probably looking at driving, which takes around 30 hours or so, according to Google. This includes the approximately 4-hour ferry between the North and the South Island, or vice versa. There are 2 main companies that run this, Bluebridge and the Inter-Islander, both of which have been breaking down a lot recently though. In terms of geography, the North Island is a lot flatter but still has quite a few sizable mountains, virtually all of which are actually technically volcanoes. The northern half of the North Island is somewhat subtropical, the central area is subalpine, and then the southern end is just kind of nice rolling hills, and the southern island is far more mountainous. The Southern Alps are actually the push-up or uplift of 2 tectonic plates that run the length of the country, henceforth why you may experience an earthquake while you're here, although I honestly hope not, and it's not too big. We have earthquakes every single day in this country, but most of them you will not feel. Other than the Southern Alps, the west coast is notoriously wet due to the uplift of the rain clouds having to ascend to go over the Southern Alps and dropping a bunch of rain on the west side before they go over to the east, which is a lot drier and flatter. The southernmost part of New Zealand is technically almost sub-Antarctic, so we go from tropical to very, very cold from the top to the bottom of the country. As we are in the southern hemisphere, if you're coming from anywhere in the north, North America or Europe, our seasons are opposite. So our summer runs over the New Year and Christmas time period, and our winter is in June, July, August. And contrary to popular opinion about what you might see online about New Zealand, is that we are not very sunny at all, and anyone who posts a bunch of photos from their trip where it is all sun either got really lucky or is lying to you about how good their experience was. New Zealand is known as the land of the long white cloud. More accurately, it is known as the land of 4 seasons in one day. Even in summer, the weather can be very interchangeable, and this is because New Zealand has a maritime-based climate. We're very long and narrow, so even though we have our weather forecasts, they're not necessarily always accurate, and you may see thunderstorms one day and sunshine the next. In addition, Wellington, in the middle of the country, New Zealand's capital city, is actually the windiest city in the world. And I am not joking, I know this for a fact because I have lived here, and it is dreadful. Now, if you're looking at planning a trip, you are most likely to be planning it for summer, because that is your best shot at having good weather. However, this is also the high season, meaning that you're going to be paying a lot more for things, so you may consider planning a trip in autumn or spring as well. Doing a trip in these months is likely to be quieter, but once again, you are more likely to run into some bad weather. So when you're planning your trip, make sure you have a few sort of contingency days, or be aware that you may end up not being able to go outside for a couple of days here and there. Additionally, sometimes in autumn and spring, or honestly quite consistently in autumn and spring if the weather is bad, some of the major roads or mountain passes can actually close. Road closures should show up on Google Maps, but I would also recommend checking the NZTA website, which I'll link below, along with any other links or websites that I mentioned throughout this video. In terms of weather forecasts to check, our national one that most people tend to use is Met Service. However, I have a little bit of beef with Met Service, and personally I trust the Norwegian website yr.no more than I trust Met Service. Don't know why they're in Norway, but they're usually more accurate, and you can also put it in for specific locations, whereas Met Service only tends to do regional ones. In terms of transportation options, you really kind of have two main ones and maybe kind of a third. The most popular way to travel New Zealand is obviously the classic van life roadie trip. Absolutely wonderful way to do it. However, I also do think it can be worthwhile looking into just hiring a car instead and booking hotels along the way, as depending on when you're coming and how long you're staying for, they probably actually could work out reasonably similar price-wise. Additionally, New Zealand's roads can be a bit sketchy, and driving a big camper van can also be a little bit intimidating for some people, especially as we drive on the left here. The third option I want to mention is public transport, and I'm going to say that as a Kiwi, I would probably not recommend this, as you miss out on a lot of the best places and the best things to do, and there aren't that many long distance transportation options. I wouldn't consider them very reliable or the best way to explore the country. In terms of where you're staying, if you're looking at booking things, there are so many options in New Zealand. There are lots of private providers as well as the classics Airbnb, Booking.com, etc. If you are hiring a camper van, you should probably be fine, but I just want to mention this one point, which is that New Zealand has reasonably strict laws now that have been updated in the past few years regarding self-contained camper vans, what's legal and what's not. Now, you cannot unfortunately just park on the side of the road in New Zealand. However, there are two amazing apps which have virtually every single campsite, from the free ones all the way up to the kind of expensive ones listed, which is Campermate and Rankers Camping. These two apps are going to be your lifesavers while you're in the country. You can even download them offline, but there are a few notes with these I also want to mention. Quite a few of the free camping sites only have limited availability, so it's definitely worthwhile having a little look ahead and seeing where you think you might camp. If there's limited spaces available, you probably do want to get there early or have a contingency plan if you're going to get there late. There are also a lot of dock campsites and other paid campgrounds, all of which are listed in those apps. These can be anywhere from kind of $10 to $40 per person on the more expensive end. However, you may want a shower at some point, particularly if you don't have one in your camper van, although hopefully you will. If you're wanting to stay at some of the paid campsites, it could be worthwhile looking at booking these ahead, particularly in the high season, but for a lot of places, if you show up, you'll probably be fine. Additionally, a couple of other apps I would definitely recommend downloading include Roadie, which has locations of anything and everything interesting in the entire country. And if you like hiking or are going to be going outside a lot, Taupo Maps is really useful. This costs about $10 per island, but for me it's one of the few paid apps I'm happy I have, as you can look at accurate maps of all the tracks and use the GPS on your phone to locate yourself, which is very helpful if you get lost. Now, the thing that everyone loves and hates to talk about: the money, the budget, the cost. Now, fortunately for everyone who comes to this country, the New Zealand dollar is actually just a really bad currency. So wherever you're coming from, you are likely to probably get a lot of New Zealand dollars for whatever cash you're converting from. However, New Zealand is actually reasonably expensive. I have heard a few people compare it to London, and having been to London myself, I would somewhat agree with this, particularly in certain areas of the country. So it's a bit of a win-lose, give-take situation. So for me personally, I have done multiple trips on around $400 New Zealand a week. However, I was not paying for the hire of a camper van because I have my own, and the prices of these can vary wildly depending on how nice a camper van you're getting and also whether it's low or high season. The price could be anywhere for you from $700 to thousands of dollars a week depending on when you come. Additionally, that $400 a week I was working on did not include any expensive activities. It was mainly directed towards petrol and food. The price of petrol in New Zealand varies a bit, but it is generally probably a little bit more on the expensive side, and the price also fluctuates massively depending on where exactly you get your petrol. There is an app you can use to check different fuel prices around the country, which is fantastic, but as a rule of thumb, Waitomo tends to be the cheapest. Gull is also on the cheaper side. Occasionally Pack and Save fuel can be on the cheaper side. The most expensive tend to be BP, Z and Mobil. However, once again, the prices do fluctuate and it's always worth checking because it will actually probably save you quite a lot, particularly if you have a camper van that guzzles fuel. I would honestly say that you probably need to budget a couple of $1,000s per week, particularly if you're wanting to do activities along the way. In terms of food, if you're staying in a camper van, you are definitely going to want to stock up on a few things, and the cheapest place to do this is Pack and Save. Pack and Save is the cheapest grocery store in New Zealand almost always, followed probably by Countdown, and then New World is the expensive one. Plus we also have our corner stores and dairies, which are not dairy farms, they're like a corner store, but we call them dairies. Those are usually really expensive though, and probably a last resort unless you want to blast your money on a bunch of milk bottles. I would recommend doing grocery shopping, as if you're eating out all the time, it will add up quite quickly. And there's also something really nice about making your own meal in a camper van or sitting outside, only if it's sunny. If it's raining, it's not so fun. But I'm sure the main thing you want to know about is the itinerary, so let's get started. Day 1 starts in Auckland, New Zealand's biggest city and henceforth biggest airport, where you are most likely going to arrive. Depending on what time of day you get in, you can spend more or less time here. But if you're here for the nature, check out Taupo, get ice cream and then leave. On day 2, I would recommend driving down and around through the Coromandel, Tauranga, Mount Maunganui area. There are so many really cool places around the Coromandel, like Cathedral Cove, Hot Water Beach, the Pinnacles, and in general the area is just quite stunning. As well, hiking up Mount Maunganui is a Kiwi classic, and the Tauranga area is probably a good place to stay for the night, as on day 3 you'll be going down through Hobbiton and towards Rotorua. You definitely need to book Hobbiton well in advance, but getting down to Rotorua, I would definitely recommend checking out the hot springs, going for a walk around some of the thermal areas, and just inhaling the lovely fart smelling air. Now day 4, if you want to do one of the coolest things in the country, you will be getting up very early, but this is going through the Tongariro Taupo area and doing hopefully the Tongariro crossing, or alternatively going up to Whakapapa village, checking out the Tongariro Chateau, which is unfortunately closed at the moment. Or if you can't make the big walk, doing a little loop, something like Taranaki Falls, is definitely well worthwhile. This is one of my favourite areas of the country and definitely worth going for a hike in. Day 5, you will have more driving down to Wellington, and when you get to Wellington, I would definitely recommend having a little look at the world's coolest little capital. I'm allowed to make fun of Wellington because it's my hometown, but there are some cool things to do here. Things like taking the cable car up the hill, or going to Te Papa, which is the National Museum, having a walk along the waterfront, or checking out one of the many cafes or restaurants that are in Wellington. Fun fact, we have more cafes and bars and restaurants per capita than New York does. Some of my favourite places to eat in Wellington include Cafe Neo for brunch, the Library for cocktails, Chow for Asian fusion, Logan Brown for a more up-end experience, and Duck Island for ice cream. We are also really big on coffee, so my favourite places are Little Grump, West 2 Espresso, Supreme, People's on Luke's Lane, and Havana. Now, I would recommend possibly sacrificing your sleep or just figuring it out and taking the Inter-Islander late at night or early in the morning, because the next day you are going to be in the South Island. Now, when you arrive in Picton, there are 2 sort of different options that you could take. One is to go west towards Abel Tasman and Nelson, but I would recommend actually heading down the east coast via Kaikoura, as I think it's a better route choice. but I am going to discuss some alternative options and ways you could make your trip longer or other areas to go to later on in this video. But day 6 is going through Kaikoura, one of the most gorgeous little coastal towns ever, and down through to Christchurch. This will be another big day of driving, but you will have lovely views the entire way. Additionally, if you have the time to, nipping slightly inland to Hamner Springs is well worthwhile. It's sort of New Zealand's equivalent of Aspen, a cool sort of resort town, but the mountains are not as big. Now, honestly, you can actually almost skip Christchurch if you really want to, which I would recommend doing, as there are some nice camping grounds if you're driving down this route and then heading towards Arthur's Pass, which will be day 7. Arthur's Pass runs through the Southern Alps and goes from Christchurch on the east to the west coast on the other side, and this is such a gorgeous area of the country. There are a few different hikes and waterfalls you can stop at along the way. Probably my most recommended one would be Devil's Punch Bowl Falls if it's up. However, the weather through here can sometimes be a little bit bad and the pass can occasionally be closed. Upon saying that, in the summer it should be open and you should be treated with insane views and an absolutely gorgeous landscape. You will want to stop and take photos about every 5 minutes, which is why I've allocated a full day for this route. Additionally, you will run into some keas in Arthur's Pass, more likely than not. Keas are quite easily New Zealand's coolest little bird, and whilst they are epic, you will probably also find yourself yelling at one quite quickly. Someone had fun with my surfboard bag, didn't you? Huh? At any rate, you will end up on the west coast of New Zealand overnight, and I have a favourite camping spot on the west coast, which is Cobden Beach. This is because I lived in Greymouth for a year and Cobden Beach was where I learned to surf, but I also think it's one of the coolest camping spots, and it's free, and it has toilets. Important stuff. But it's also the perfect quiet place to base yourself before you head down the west coast on day 8. Now, once again, there are so many spots to stop at on this day, and I'm always really confused when I see people skipping the west coast on their road trips, because I actually think it's one of the most stunning and underrated parts of New Zealand. You have Fox Glacier, Franz Josef Glacier. Unfortunately, they have both receded a lot. You also have a series of stunning lakes. Probably the best known one is Lake Matheson, which has insane reflections when the water is still. You also have Haast Pass, which once again can sometimes close. And you can drive virtually all the way through to Wanaka with a bunch of amazing waterfalls. However, one thing I'll note about the west coast and this particular drive is that there is an approximately 100-kilometre long section where there is no fuel, no stores, and no reception. Fortunately, there are a lot of signs telling you this, but I still think it's kind of fascinating and a bit funky that there is just this massive section of New Zealand that has nothing but people drive through. I don't know. Now, day 9 is the beautiful Wanaka and surrounding areas. There are a whole bunch of really epic hikes, as well as the gorgeous town itself. Some shorter hikes that are worthwhile doing is Ismouth Peak on the east side of the lake, or the most Instagrammed hike in the world, Roy's Peak on the west side. I don't have any beef with Roy's Peak, but I just find the fact that it's so Instagrammed really amusing, and I definitely recommend stopping to eat somewhere in Wanaka as well. You can probably stay in Wanaka overnight, or alternatively drive through to Queenstown so you are there for the start of day 10, which is everything Queenstown. Now, there are so many different outdoorsy activities you can do in Queenstown. It is a real hub for adventurers. What you choose to do here will be dependent on you, but if you're looking at hiking, there is the gorgeous Ben Lomond. If you want an adrenaline rush, there is bungee jumping and jet boats as well. In the winter, there is skiing, there's the gondola, the luge, so many different options. And one of my favourite things about Queenstown is the food. Ferg Burger is infamous, and whilst it's always crowded, it does still live up to its reputation of making a bloody good burger. Additionally, I'm also a big fan of the Incredible Sweet Shop, or whatever exactly it's called. They make great fudge, as well as the Cookie Time Bar is a pretty nice place, and Patagonia for their hot chocolates and ice cream. These are my favourite places in Queenstown, and I would recommend checking all of them out, even though your stomach may be a bit full by the end of the day. Now, You'll probably stay overnight in Queenstown again because on day 11 you will have the lovely experience of driving all the way out to Milford Sound and then probably going back in the evening. Not to say that this road isn't gorgeous, but just it is a lot of driving. You will be heading out to Milford Sound, and I'm gonna say do not fall asleep or miss this drive, because in my personal opinion I actually think that the drive out to Milford is just as beautiful as Milford Sound itself. Obviously, once you're in Milford Sound, you want to go on a cruise or alternatively go kayaking is another fun option. But I really think that the drive through this area is just fantastic. You will probably want to pull over at every second corner, so honestly, just stop at every sign you see or anything that takes your fancy. However, do be careful when you pull over, as there are a lot of blind corners on this road. But on day 12, you will be heading up through my favourite area in the whole country, which is Aoraki. Now, my personal recommendation is to take it slow, stop at lots of spots along the way, as there are so many cool places. You can go to the Orama Clay Cliffs, and you can also do the infamous walk up to New Zealand's highest mountain, Mount Cook. Not all the way up to the top, obviously, but to Hooker Lake, where you have incredible views of the mountain. This only takes a few hours, and then you're able to drive back and park somewhere around Lake Pukaki, and on a clear day you can still see Mount Cook from around here. This entire area you can freedom camp around. It's one of the few places you can. It is my favourite spot to camp in the whole country, and if you're lucky there will be a great sunset while you're here. On day 13 you'll be driving from Mount Cook through to Christchurch, meaning you get to stop at cool places like Lake Tekapo and the Fairley Bakehouse, which do a mean pie as far as I'm concerned. And you can spend the night in Christchurch, and depending on how much time you have in the evening, or alternatively day 14 if you're flying out late in the night, you can drive out to Banks Peninsula and to the little French settlement of Akaroa. I think this whole area is pretty gorgeous, and it's also geographically quite interesting, so depending on how much time you have, it's a nice thing to do in Christchurch rather than just necessarily staying in the city. Now, I think that is a lot to fit in 14 days. It's definitely doable, but you will be very tired at the end of it. However, you will have seen some of the best sights that the country has to offer. But if you're coming all this way, I do think it would be awesome to do 3 or 4 weeks around the islands rather than just 2. So I want to talk about a bunch of ways that I think you could extend the trip or spend a bit more time. Obviously the first one is to do the route that I've suggested, but just do it a bit slower and take a few more days here and there to really immerse yourself in the areas. Maybe you want to do a few different outdoor activities or some hikes, and you just want to take things a bit slower paced. That would be my main recommendation. Now, as I've mentioned earlier, once you get to the South Island, you can go west towards Abel Tasman and Nelson. So if you decided to do this option, which I do think is worthwhile if you have the extra time to, you can go out that way, spend a bit of time there doing some of the amazing outdoor activities and checking out the beaches, and then head back through the Nelson Lake St. Arnaud area, which is a gorgeous part of the country as well, and then continue south on the original suggested route through Kaikoura. Alternatively, you can go through Lewis Pass instead down from Nelson, but I would say Nelson Lakes is probably the better option, as if you take Lewis Pass you'll go straight through Hamner Springs, which is epic, but you do have to backtrack up the coast a bit to get to Kaikoura. I would actually recommend spending a little bit of time in and around Te Anau, as Fiordland is just a gorgeous part of the country and I think warrants a couple more days than just going in and out to Milford. Additionally, from here you can head south down towards Bluff, Slope Point, which is the southernmost point in the country, and you can also visit a really epic area called the Catlins. The Catlins is a gorgeous area, very far south, some lovely beaches, beautiful rolling hills. Then you can also make your way up to the city of Dunedin, which has Baldwin Street, the world's steepest street. There's a Jaffa rolling competition down it, but I don't know when that is, and it's a bit weird. Don't talk about Jaffas. And then from Dunedin you can head back inland towards Mount Cook, or you could alternatively shoot straight up to Christchurch, then go back south through Mount Cook, Wanaka, and fly out of Queenstown instead, although this would add a bit of extra time to your trip and you definitely need more time to do it. Also, there isn't that much in between Christchurch and Dunedin, so Another really cool place to go to, although it does mean you will probably do a little bit of doubling back or have to drive a lame section of road, is going to the west coast of the North Island. If you have lots of time and you love surfing, visit the town of Raglan. It is a classic Kiwi surfing spot. But the main thing on the west coast I would actually recommend checking out is Mount Taranaki and the New Plymouth area. Mount Taranaki is a standalone, almost perfectly cylindrical mountain. It looks epic. If you fly down south from Auckland, sometimes you can even see it from the plane, but you can also hike up this one reasonably easily. As well, there's also the Taranaki Coastal Highway, but this is a little bit of an annoying add-on as driving between Taupo and Taranaki is not a great road. I've done it before, would not really recommend. So now that I've talked about extending the trip, I want to just share a recommendation on if you are really pressed for time and can't even make those 2 weeks. My main suggestion is to just do the South Island. If you can, do a loop from Christchurch out and around the cool areas. The shortest trip I think you can do, and a lot of people kind of do come to New Zealand for, is a in and out of Queenstown, going down to Milford, around Wanaka, and just kind of concentrating on that area. I do think you miss out on a bunch of other really cool stuff, but you can probably do that in about 3 to 4 days and it covers such a gorgeous area of the country. If you have a few more days, I would recommend going in and out of Christchurch instead, as then you get that gorgeous drive through Mount Cook, Lake Tekapo. Just that sort of area is lovely as well and means you see a little bit more than just the one kind of super touristed area, because I will admit that the Queenstown area can get pretty crowded in the high season. So I've covered a lot of information about New Zealand thus far, so this is probably most of what you need to know for your trip. Although I do have a few more things I'd love to share about my home country. This includes things like cuisine, music, culture, and a few safety pointers as well. Once again, these are all time-stamped, but I hope you enjoy. Now, in terms of cuisine, New Zealand does have its own cuisine, believe it or not. Some of it has been stolen from other places in the world, namely the UK, but we also have a few which are very much our own creation. Now, we care a lot about pies. You need to try a steak and cheese or a mince and cheese while you're here, but we do also have a whole pie series of awards that are quite a big deal. I will link the website below for you, but we do take our pies very seriously. Other exciting cuisines we have that I would recommend trying include fish and chips, whitebait fritters, pawa fritters, lollylog, pavlova, pikelets, lamingtons, afghans, Anzac biscuits, hokey pokey ice cream, pineapple lumps, the classic kiwi onion dip, a chocolate fish, Whittaker's, which is the best chocolate in the world, and also my personal favourite item at the grocery store is Fix and Fog peanut butter. It just tastes better. Now, some other fun things you might want to know about is that New Zealand has a pretty cool national anthem in my opinion, but what you really need to know is that our true national anthem is Slice of Heaven by Dave Dobbin. Now, whilst you will have never heard of this guy, I'm pretty sure every single Kiwi knows all the words to this song. Even if they're 5 years old, you will find a child sitting somewhere if it comes on going da da dum boom boom da da dum boom boom. Everyone knows it. I actually have a New Zealand music playlist which I will link in the description down below, but some other artists I would recommend checking out for your summer road trip playlist and really getting on the laid back sort of reggae New Zealand vibes include Split Ends, The Exponents, Dragon, Drax Project, 660, LAB, Catch a Fire, Mako Road, and Fat Freddy's Drop. Now, a couple of things that I want to stress in terms of safety concerns about New Zealand as well is that the weather is so interchangeable, and I'm really sick of seeing tourists go hiking or taking on treks with inadequate gear or inadequate experience. Please research everything properly, particularly if you're going into the national parks, and don't assume that everything is going to work out for you when you go into the outdoors. It is true that a lot of people have died in our national parks because they have been ill prepared, and even experienced trampers and hikers and mountaineers who have been here for years can end up unfortunately passing away in the outdoors. Always pack for all weather conditions and take extra food with you, and if you can, get your hands on or hire a PLB, which is short for a personal locator beacon if you are doing longer trips. This is because there are a lot of places in New Zealand that do not have reception and you are not going to be able to call someone or any sort of help on your phone if you get stuck. So do not necessarily rely on your phone to get you out of the outdoors. A big point is to buy sunscreen in New Zealand and lather it on yourself. We have a hole in the ozone layer which is like shrinking or growing or whatever, but at any rate, you will burn in this country really easily compared to everywhere else. You can go outside for half an hour without sunblock on and end up peeling. I am not joking. The sun down here is insane and you need to be pretty careful. Also, you will find that customs is really strict with biosecurity, and this is because we do have so many endemic species and a lot of threatened or endangered species as well. You are not going to be able to bring any food or like natural products into or out of the country, so just think about that when you're packing, and also make sure you've cleaned all your gear properly if you've been in the outdoors and are wanting to bring that stuff here. Something that is unfortunately also a problem in New Zealand is that a lot of tourists and Kiwis alike tend to litter, particularly in some of the national parks, and this is really unfortunate to see. Please do not be that person. Always take your trash and your litter out with you when you're hiking. There are no exceptions. Just be a tidy Kiwi. As well, if you ever need to know something or you're a little bit lost or need directions, you can definitely pull over and just ask the first Kiwi you see. We will probably be more than happy to help you unless someone's having a really bad day. Another cool note I want to make is that New Zealand is a nuclear-free country. Whether that is a pro or con depends on your personal opinion on nuclear energy. Also, sending packages to and from New Zealand is really expensive. I would not recommend doing it. Put stuff in your suitcase instead and take it back to your family. Additionally, last time I did a road trip around the South Island, although the route does differ slightly from what I've suggested in the itinerary here, I documented my entire journey and trip around, so if you'd like to, please feel free to check that out. You'll get an overview of some of the gorgeous landscapes that are around and more of an idea of what some of the places look like. Unfortunately, I didn't have the best weather, but I did manage to hit Roy's Peak at sunset with no one else around, which was a pretty impressive feat if I do say so myself. So overall, I hope you have enjoyed this video and it's going to help you planning out your trip to New Zealand and has eased any of your planning or preparation fears you have for your trip to this beautiful country. I hope when you come here that you have an amazing time and that the weather is in your favor. I'm not the best at saying the cliche YouTube stuff, but it would mean a lot if you subscribed and gave the video a thumbs up. At any rate, I hope you have a great day wherever you are, your planning goes well, and I'll see you somewhere around New Zealand or in the next video.